Happy Super Tuesday, everybody. I am Silvia Salazar from Tono Latino. If you decided to join me after the Telemundo segment came out this weekend, I wanted to give you a huge thank you. Let's talk about why today is such a big deal. There are 14 states and 1 territory voting today in the primaries, and in total, about a third of all the delegates are up for grabs. If you like exact numbers like I do, we're talking about 1,357 delegates that could be snatched technically today, but not exactly, and I'll tell you why in a second. So, the last 24 hours have been crazy. Pete Buttigieg dropped out of the race. Amy Klobuchar dropped out of the race. And both of them decided to endorse former Vice President Joe Biden. You know who else endorsed Joe Biden? Beto O'Rourke, former congressman from the state of Texas, as well as Harry Reid, former majority leader in the Senate. So that means Joe Biden all of a sudden is coming back as the alternative, let's be frank, to Bernie Sanders, who is polling at around 27% nationwide and Biden at around 17%. Next, after those two, are Bloomberg and Elizabeth Warren at around 14%. And then way down is Tulsi at 1%. Those are the numbers as a snapshot in time, but let's be realistic. Those numbers didn't take into account all of the support that Joe Biden got over the last 24 hours. But let's not get into the details about that. I don't want to stir any fights. I want you to know something really important. The number, the super important number to remember today is 15%. If a candidate gets 15% of the vote, it means that they are able to receive delegates. If they only get 14.9, they get zero, nadita, nada. So, for example, if 415 delegates that are available in California and the only candidate that clears the 15% threshold is Bernie Sanders, he gets all of the delegates. But if, for example, he gets over 15% and so does Biden or Warren, then they have to divide the delegates. Exactly how the delegates are divided can vary by state and district. I don't want to get too much into the weeds, but for example, in Texas, there's over 200 delegates that are allocated, and the Democratic Party will allocate more delegates to the more liberal districts. Something that I learned super interesting after some of you asked me this question is what happens with the delegates that were already allocated to candidates that dropped out, like for example, Pete Buttigieg and Amy Klobuchar. Well, here's something interesting that I learned. Turns out they didn't drop out officially. They didn't end their campaigns. They just suspended their campaigns, which means they get to hold on to those delegates. Why? Back to the 15% number. In New Hampshire, the only 3 candidates that cleared the 15% threshold were Bernie, Pete, and Amy, which means that if Pete and Amy decide to officially drop out, Bernie gets all of the New Hampshire delegates. Remember, states like California allow people to still drop in their mail ballots today, so it's going to be weeks until we know the final numbers. Remember, we're talking about a third of all the delegate count, so I'm sure it's going to take a long time to figure out who won, but it's going to be very interesting what's going to happen with Bloomberg only competing officially today after spending over $500 million in ads. And he got into this race because he didn't want Bernie to win and he didn't think Biden was strong enough. But now we've seen Joe Biden resuscitate from the dead. So it's going to be a super interesting race to watch. That's all I wanted to tell you. I want to know, do you think that we will have a definitive nominee before the Democratic National Convention this summer? Drop what you think in the comments. Remember to be super respectful. As always, like, subscribe, and share my videos. Thank you so much. Tengan un buen día. Chao.